Hi, and welcome to another edition of What Do You Want to Do? I'm Leonard Kaplan, and this is part two of my two-part series with Dr. Marisela Marrero. In part one, we watched as Marisela went through her career from an ER doctor to a hospital administrator, and how she at one point was the president of 5 hospitals in Miami. This week, we have part two as Maricela tells us a very special story that I won't tell you a thing about. I want you guys to be surprised, but it's guaranteed a story you've never heard, and it involves a very famous person. And finally, we're going to end the show as we usually do with our guest telling us about how to enter the profession, in this case, the medical profession, at any level, and how to have confidence in yourself and all the things that a person needs to do to be a success. So stay with us, and we'll be right back.
Leadership, it's about understanding people and being empathetic and asking for help when you need help, right? That was one of the first things I told my team when I started is I was certainly not the expert when I began. And I'm going to rely on all of you to help me make sure that this runs well. And that's what we did. And I think it was a big part of the success that we had.
Do you ever miss the interaction with the patients?
Well, what I tell folks is maybe not exactly in the current role I have as SVP of Health Equity, because I'm not sitting at the hospital site, but all of the other jobs that I've done, including being a regional president or a hospital president, CEO, it depends on the type of system that you work for. But one of the key things for us is to round on the medical floors every day. So no matter what was going on, unless there was a true emergency, the boiler needed to be fixed, then some company needed to come fix that. Every single day of the week, I would round on the medical floors, and I would go to a different floor every week. And I would listen to what the doctors and the social workers and the case managers and the residents and the medical students had to say about the patients that were in my hospital. And what I was really there to do is to be an extra resource for them, because they're taking care of the clinical side of the patient. But if a health insurance plan wasn't giving benefits to a patient because maybe they didn't have any more benefits to go, let's say, to a rehab facility, that's where I would go in, because that's not something that the doctor per se might be able to influence, right? The caretaker of that patient as much as I could. So I would try to take things off their hands that I knew I could impact. And in so doing, I would go and talk to the patients myself, and I would assess what was going on with them medically. Sometimes I would explain to them what their medical issues were, because maybe they were afraid to ask the doctor extra questions, or maybe there was a language barrier. So the reason why I'm saying all of this is because I never left that connection with the patient. And when I felt that I was being distracted and in the whirlwind of issues throughout the day, I would always go back to the bedside to remind myself of why I was doing the job that I was doing. And so, other than being the person putting in a big line in somebody's vein or in their neck, or putting a tube down their throat, I pretty much have done and continue to do the intellectual part of taking care of patients, including the interaction.
Okay, I'm glad you explained that because you assume
Yes,
everyone would assume when you go into the administrative area that there's no time and you're completely divorced from that because that all that other stuff that you explained is so demanding in itself.
it
So,
absolutely is. And I think it's not, I probably get asked that same question you asked me once a month.
okay.
Everybody, once they find out that I was a practicing clinician and that now I'm not, that's the first question that they ask. Do you miss it? And that's when I have to explain that I never really left it. And it's really rewarding to be in a position where I can actually influence something as big as whether it's benefits on a health insurance side or fix a systemic issue for multiple patients. It's really satisfactory to have the power to be able to do that. and help so many more people by understanding the process. And I think that not a lot of presidents and CEOs do this. I can tell you that. Uh, we do it in our organization because it's important and because our CEO is a cardiac surgeon himself. But I think more people should do that. I think all administrators should spend at least part of their day, every single day, on the wards, because it's the only way that you're going to understand what works and what's not working. And the other, I also did it with my environmental services team. So I would go with the environmental services director, and I would just go into a certain number of rooms every week with him. And I would say, how's the food? How's the staff? Is the floor clean? How's the bathroom? And you would be surprised about such little things that we could fix and how happy it made people. And it could be something like the cable wasn't working. Well, when you're sitting in a hospital bed for hours or days, not having a working television is a big deal, right? And so I could just call someone to fix the cable. And that was the happiest patient in the world, right? Because something so simple for us or for me, we could just fix right on the spot, right? Or, somebody I remember once told us that the paper towel dispenser was broken. Again, little things, but if you have to keep going to the bathroom and you're taking the roll of paper out manually, it's not pleasant. And so that's where, how are you going to know that if you're not taking the time to sit down and be a patient yourself? And that's what I always told my team is, I don't care what you're doing, you have to be part of what's going on in the house so that we can be better administrators.
Little things are really the big things. That's the lesson there, I guess.
Yes, they
That's
are.
wow. Now, how do you handle, take a hypothetical situation. A doctor maybe made a mistake or has been lax or they're not sleeping enough. And this reflects badly on the hospital that you're the boss of. What do you do in that case? Have you ever had to give warnings and fire people and hire them too?
Yes, so a lot of questions in that one.
Sorry, I
But what I,
that's
no,
because
but
my
it's
memory's bad.
no,
I
it's not bad. It's excellent. Your memory is excellent. But all of those items are really important. Of course, I've dealt with anything and everything that you can think of that happens in a hospital setting, I've dealt with. What I can say is the following. I go back to the fact that doctors are humans. We are, human people, and we have to understand that humans make mistakes. Humans are not perfect. And so when anything happens whatsoever, there's a very rigorous process. So let's say there's an incident. This is a hypothetical situation. Let's say somebody got the wrong blood transfused. Okay. So when you get a blood transfusion, you're supposed to, do a test to check the patient's blood type, to confirm it with the laboratory. Then you have to have two different people or sometimes more, and you have to check the birth date and ask the patient multiple times, is this your name? Is this your birthday? This is your blood, so that you make sure that there's a perfect match. Well, let's say that Nurse Mary, right? I'm making it up, forgot to look at the birth date or thought she saw a number that wasn't the correct number or was really tired and picked up the bag of blood that was for the patient next door who looked very similar. There's a number of things that can happen, right? And that patient gets the transfusion that they're not supposed to get, and they get an allergic reaction to it. When something like that happens, what you do is you file something called an incident report. And there are ways to do this with people's names, and there are ways to do it as the reporter, okay, anonymously, because the goal is that we all have to foster an environment of safety. That's the most important thing in a hospital. Everybody has to be safe. And so there can't be any repercussions, right, for those that report or anybody else, because we want to engage people in saying, if you see something, you have to do something about it, right? It's not just say something, you actually have to do something in the hospital world. So somebody will file an incident report. Oftentimes it's the person that realized they made a mistake. It could be a coworker, it could be their manager, it could be a person that's in the room that's not the nurse. So they file an incident report, and that gets looked at by a long list of people. And it goes all the way up to the chief medical officer, to the hospital president, and on and on and on, and then to the chief medical officer of the company. And there's a very specific process of what you do. And what you want to assess is, how did this happen? How was there a breakdown? Was the ink on the sticker not very clear? Was the nurse distracted? Was there an error in the band that was put on the patient by the technician? And so the idea is, you want to find out why there was a breakdown so that you can fix it and it doesn't happen again. And of course, if there's any harm whatsoever, this is disclosed to a number of people as well, to the patient, to the Department of Public Health. So there's a very strict process when these things occur, and depending on the severity, when they're reported to the authorities. Hope that example
Yeah,
helped.
that's a great, again, I'm going to compliment the medical community because you don't hear that stuff. I'm glad I asked you that question because, I think there are a lot of people out there like the anti-vaxxer groups of people, they demonize the medical industry and they don't know that there are these checks and balances and the chances are of something happening and not being accountable for it are very, very low. Like you say, everybody's human
Mm-hmm,
and
mm-hmm.
you have to make allowances for that and at the same time keep everybody safe. Okay.
Absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of humans working in one place to take care of patients. And so, of course, inevitably there will be things, but the idea is to have processes that are so tight
Yeah.
and everybody understands that process so
Yeah.
that it doesn't happen. I mean, you still hear, which I'm always amazed, you still hear about wrong site surgery. I mean, you should see what happens in an operating room before you can even cut the patient. There are so many people involved. You have to count everything. You have to, multiple people. You have to mark the leg, and still mistakes happen. Why? Because there's a breakdown in the process, and because humans make mistakes. And so the idea is, everybody has to be able to feel comfortable in that culture to speak up, because it could come from, it could be the cleaner, it could be the person cleaning the
Hmm.
floor. And I have a really fun, interesting story, not from my personal experience, but from another doctor who I have worked with in another system he was working at. He said that they had instilled the culture of safety so well into their hospital population that one time there was a surgeon who went to the bedside, like to a patient's room, to do a procedure. And there were some people helping the surgeon. And what you're supposed to do is something called a timeout. So before you do anything, you have to make sure that the field is clean, that it's sterile, that the area where you're going to, cut or whatever he was doing is marked appropriately. Everybody has to understand that they agree that that's the right part of the body, that they're going to do that. And so it's called the timeout. Well, there was a cleaner, physically, a woman cleaning the floor, and the surgeon was about to, put the needle in or, make the cut on the patient's extremity. And the cleaner stopped and said, Dr. So and so, you didn't do your timeout. You can't start your case. So if you can
Wow.
imagine the environmental services worker telling the surgeon, you didn't do your timeout, that's the exemplary culture of
Yeah.
safety. That's how it should be. Everybody should be able to say, wait a minute, because that's how mistakes won't happen. But it's a real story from a system that just did an amazing job in saying everybody's important, everybody has to speak up.
And you would not see that on one of those medical shows on television. That's for sure.
No, I mean, I've never seen that. That would be great if I did. That's pretty powerful.
That's amazing in the fact I've been in hospitals recently. My mother got hip replacement, and at every stage, they asked her birthday, they asked her name, they asked her which side needs the operation. And I thought to myself, this is obviously before our conversation here, I said there may have been incidents where somebody made a mistake and they have to make this safeguard to prevent it from happening in the future.
Yeah, and again, that's great because that's the standardized process for everyone. Every
Yeah.
hospital has to do exactly what your mom went through. And sometimes people get annoyed because they just asked me my name and my birthday. But when you hear that, you have to remind yourself and say, "Oh, they're doing that for my safety." So you should ask
Yeah.
me every time because every time you ask, that's one less mistake that somebody will make. But that's why it's done. Same reason why different doctors will go back to the patient and ask you the same thing you said when you walked in through the hospital. They go, "Well, tell me why you're here." And I just said the story 5 times. But again, everybody wants their version to corroborate the information that's on the record. And that's why they ask again and again and again. So I would try to, when I was practicing clinically, I tried to summarize it for the patient before I said, "Can you tell me what happened today?" Because they would give me that look of, "Are you seriously asking me, for the 10th time?" So what I would tell them is, "I know you've said this 10 times, but I still have to corroborate your story. This is what I have from the previous doctor. Do you agree with that?" And then at least it would allow them to tell me yes or no. But every time they looked at you like, "Really? How
Yeah,
many
that's
times
the
do I have
look
to
my
tell
mother
you?"
was giving everybody.
I bet she was. She's not the only one. Don't worry.
No, no, and I couldn't answer it, but I was thinking of all these things. Um, okay, so we're almost at the end, but there's a story that you've told on another interview with somebody that I saw, and I'm wondering if you're up to telling the story now. If you're not, then that's okay.
Oh, the George,
Y yes,
the George
yes,
story.
yes. How'd you know that?
I know. It's become a popular story. Let's put it that way.
It's a one of a kind story, and it's historical.
It really is. It really is. I'll try to give you the summary version.
Okay.
Hopefully, folks won't be falling asleep. But they're going to be like, "Leonard, you've had Marisela on for so long."
Nobody is going to fall asleep. Trust me.
Oh, you're too funny. Well, when I was growing up in Puerto Rico, I grew up with my father and my mother, and I have two older brothers. And we attended a DoD school, which is a Department of Defense school inside a military base called Fort Buchanan. I was in elementary school, my brothers were in middle school at the time. And there was a tragedy where there was a fire in the Dupont Plaza Hotel in San Juan in December of 1986. And my father, who was working with some investigation at the hotel, unfortunately died in that fire. So we were told shortly thereafter that because my father had died, we were no longer eligible to use the school system or any of the facilities in the military base. And that was because the federal law establishes that if the federal employee is not actively working for the government, then they're not privy to the school system or any of the other facilities at the military base. And therefore, we had to leave the school, which was pretty terrible for us because we had not only lost our father, but now lost the key to my education, which was really great education, but we didn't have to pay for it because it was part of what my father got as a benefit of his job. So we had to go to a different school for some time. And unbeknownst to us and unrelated to this specific incident with the school, we were invited to the White House and also to meet with James Baker, who is the Secretary of Treasury at the time, because very few Secret Service agents in the United States have died in the line of duty. And my father had done the job for 20 years, so they wanted to give us an award in his name for the services that he provided the US government. My mom, my two brothers, and myself flew out to Washington, D.C. This was about, a year from the incident. And we met with James Baker and subsequently had a private White House tour with Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush, which was fascinating because I was young at the time and didn't realize how big of a deal that was. Now I do. And so we're touring the White House, and somehow my mother, in her broken English, was able to tell George H.W. Bush what had happened with the school system. And so he told her, I understand, and this is terrible, but there needs to be another law made because I can't single handedly change the law, even though it's nobody agrees with it. In order for that to change, we have to create another law. And so he said, I'm going to help you. I have to put together a team of White House attorneys to help draft a bill, which then, has to go through the Senate and the House and be signed by the President of the United States. About a year later, he kept his promise and he called my mother and said that Ronald Reagan was signing the Marrero Law in May of 88. And we were able to go back to the school, which was a huge undertaking on behalf of my mother and, of course, George H.W., who I will never forget because it changed my life. So I went back to the school, studied really hard. And as you said earlier, I went to Yale, which is where all the Bushes went to school. So it was a big deal that I got accepted there because I felt it was a way to pay back for what I was given. And then after that, when I attended Harvard Medical School and I graduated, I decided to write George H.W. a letter with the whole story I just recounted, saying that because of him, I was able to go back to the Antilles high school and system in Puerto Rico, that he changed my life. And I had gone to Yale, which was where he went to school. And now I was graduating from Harvard Medical School. And I just really wanted him to know how appreciative and grateful I was and my family was for what he did. And I wrote every phone number I could think of at the time, address, my dorm address, anything I could think of for contact information, because this was in 2004 and there was no social media or any of the things that we have today. School graduation, of course. And so I didn't hear during the graduation period. But about 2 weeks later, I was in Puerto Rico for summer vacation, and I got a phone call on my cell phone, which of course was not registered. Cell phones were also different in 2004. And it said, private. So I picked up, completely not expecting anything. And he says, is this Marisela Marrero? And I said, oh my goodness. I said, yes. He said, this is George Bush from Texas. I said, I know, because I don't know anybody else who has that accent. Nobody else has my cell phone with that accent. And I said, I can't believe you're calling my cell phone. I can't believe this is 2004, are calling my cell phone. And what he told me was, how could I have not called you after the letter you sent me? You've lived the American dream, and I'm very proud of you, and I'm proud of your family. And then he said he had some cold symptoms and whether I knew a doctor that could help him. And I said, Mr. President, I will fly to Texas right now and take care of you for the rest of my life free of charge, if that's what you want. And so he was always very comedic. And, he started laughing because obviously he didn't really need me to take care of his cold. He had plenty of doctors in Texas and in the White House. But he was just a phenomenal human being. And the reason I love to tell the story is not only because, yes, it's a great story, but it showcases how great of a human being he was. He did something that he didn't have to do, didn't really give him any fame or any credit, but nothing. He did it because it was the right thing to do. And he knew that he had to take the time to help us. And for that, I will always be indebted to him. It's unfortunate he's no longer with us, but
Yeah.
hopefully one of these days I'll meet his son and tell him what a great father he had.
That's an amazing and true story, and nobody deserves it more than you, Marisela. That's
Thank you, Leonard. So
it's
sweet.
awesome. It's
Appreciate
awesome.
that.
Anyway, now for to sign off here because we got 4 minutes left before we're cut off again by my free version of Zoom. Your advice to those who want to either follow in your footsteps, do something similar, or do something that everybody's telling them, nah, you're not good enough. What would you tell them?
What I would say is number one, follow your passion. If you follow your passion and if you work hard enough, you can accomplish anything. And don't let people stir you off your path because when you start out doing something you don't love, you're just not going to excel in the same way and you're not going to be as fulfilled. So find whatever it is that you love and just work really hard at it to make it work for you. And that goes really for any career. You can make a business, you could do well with anything in life as long as it's what you love and you are willing to work hard enough for it.
Great. That's great advice. And I'm going to play this to you, my Essex students out there. I'm not going to name them all because I'll forget one, but they're going to watch this and they will be inspired, I'm sure. So
Well,
thank you.
thank you.
Thank you for joining me. And for you out there, before you go to sleep, before you wake up, ask yourself the question, what do you want to do?